Okay, thank you very much. So if I could have the next slide, please. So just a quick disclaimer that we're presenting the information here on dairy markets and risk management options for educational purposes. And the options presented here may not be the correct options for any single one farm. So it's important that when you're making financial decisions for your own operation that you consult with experts in the field, such as your crop grower's agent, who can help guide you to options that make sense for your individual operation. If I could have the next slide, please. So today we're going to look at dairy markets. We're going to talk about the impact of 2020, including the significant market disruptions that occurred due to COVID-19. And then we're going to talk about what's in store perhaps for 2021, based on what the futures markets are telling us, as well as Dr. Bozic and Gregg McConnell's crystal ball. The presenters that we have today are really outstanding. Dr. Marin Bozic, for those of you who are not familiar with him, is a professor in the Department of Applied Economics at the University of Minnesota. He is well known throughout the nation and internationally as an expert in dairy markets and dairy risk management, and he will talk to us a lot about what's going on with dairy pricing. And then we'll follow his presentation with another presentation from Gregg McConnell. Gregg is a Farm Credit East business consultant. He has many years of experience in the field and works with dairy farms across the Northeast. And then following those two presentations, we will have an Ask the Experts session where you can submit questions to Dr. Bozic and Gregg McConnell through the questions panel on the GoToWebinar control panel. And for those of you who may not see the questions box, there should be a red arrow in the upper right-hand side of your screen. If you click on that, that'll expand the control panel, and you can click on the little triangle next to questions, and you'll be able to type in your questions. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Bozic and allow him to share his screen and his slides.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Marin. We hear you just fine.
All right, let's just choose the correct screen here. Thank you, Chris, for that introduction. I'm humbled. One more piece of biography that I feel compelled to add is that I also have a 15-month-old child at home, and I had a conversation with him this morning. I said, Alexander, I'm going to be presenting to 200 people. Please do not cry between 11 and noon. And he said, yes, Dad, I will not cry. Of course he didn't. So if you hear any cries in the back, those are not dairy producers who have not listened to my previous advices. That's just my son, who sometimes can get quite noisy in trying to get my attention. I'm trying to arrange everything at home to deliver this seamlessly, but I ask for some grace if we have some family situations in the back. Okay, so over the next 40 minutes, what I'm going to try to do is tell you a few stories and cover a few salient aspects from 2020, try to distill the correct lessons. You know, in a year like 2020, when there's so much happening, it's very, the biggest danger really is that we'll end up learning wrong lessons from it, and then that will modify our behavior in a way that really hurt us going forward, rather than make us more robust or anti-fragile, as Nassim Taleb would say. So, and also keep in mind, I will have some jokes here that are you know, tilting political. Please trust me, I am not approaching this from a political bias. Any material that I present is there just to keep you awake, entertain you, and educate you. But in fact, anybody who knows me knows that I've perhaps been more charitable to the Trump administration than most of my colleagues in academia are. So with that in mind, you'll see in a few slides why I've made this disclaimer. So we like to use colorful metaphors to talk about three kinds of risks. Oh, just a second, guys. That's you know, 150 public speaking engagements over the last however many years, and still the mistakes sometimes happen. Okay, let's try this again. All right. So we like to talk about markets in terms of colorful metaphors. And the metaphor that has been used so frequently in 2020, perhaps even overused, is the one of black swan. So black swan, what is a black swan? Black swan is a major event, a surprise, something that really shakes your world to the core, turns everything upside down. And then after it passes, then people look back and then they say, with a sort of like a Monday morning quarterbacking, saying, well, of course it had to happen, of course this or that. But when it first hits, everybody's hit by surprise. And I will argue that in many respects, 2020 has been a black swan. I will outline the dimensions that were highly surprising to us and that disturbed dairy markets, and we'll see what happened as a consequence of that. I will also talk about gray rhinos. Now, what is a gray rhino? Gray rhino is, you can think about it, the evil twin brother of the black swan, even though they're different animal species. So gray rhino is not something that happens as a surprise. In fact, it goes right at you from a mile away, but very steady and a brisk pace. And if you don't get out of the way, if you don't get out of from the middle of the road, it's just going to hit you right on, and it's going to be painful. As I will argue later in my presentation, some events that are transpiring now and that will come to full fore in the first 2 quarters of 2021 really are not black swan. They are gray rhino. We should have seen them coming. I've been telling the producers that I work with for 3-4 months now what they are and what they should do as a consequence. And trust me, guys, those that have acted on my advice now have a price locked in for Q1 that's about $1.50 higher than what you can lock in currently. So I've been spot on so far with the effects of that. So we'll talk about gray rhinos. And then the third colorful metaphor that I would use is Agent Orange. Now, I'm not a liberal. No, please. I know that some of you in the audience are now thinking, okay, there you go, just another ivory tower person. This is what I need on my Tuesday morning. No, this is not the approach that I'm taking here. What I'm trying to illustrate with the third metaphor is that we have, over the previous 4 years, experienced an administration that has been quite outspoken about their view of the world and unabashed in their attempts to implement it. That meant very dramatic changes in the ag policy space. Just think about the dairy safety net 3 years ago. We did not have dairy margin coverage. We did not have dairy revenue protection. We did not have trade mitigation even back then. But the way that the Trump administration envisioned the world, the way that they pursued their trade agenda meant that they had to insulate dairy producers from the adverse effect, short-term adverse effects of their very aggressive international posture. And that's why the metaphor of Agent Orange, which was back in back in the days of Vietnam War, a herbicide used to destroy bushes, trees, and vegetation to deprive insurgents of concealment. In other words, it's a scorched earth tactic. Pursue what you believe in with all the fire in the belly that you have, and we will see both the beneficial and some perhaps unintended side effects of such approach were in dairy markets in 2020, and what we need to be mindful of as we plan for 2021. So let's talk first about the effects of COVID-19 on dairy markets when it first started. So back in January, I was in Madison, Wisconsin. It was last week of January, and I told dairy producers there, 2020 is going to be a year to rebuild your equity. We are finally emerging from the slump, the 3-4 year slump that was the consequence of European Union removing their quotas back in 2015. So the milk production growth in Europe is finally stabilizing. The world is finding its balance, and we are going to have a good year. As I was delivering that talk, the first COVID-19 infected persons were arriving in US, and I think we had the first recorded case in US just a few days later. So much about dairy economists' ability to anticipate all the shocks. Keep that in mind. Nobody's perfect. But what happened when COVID struck us? Within a few short weeks in March, our country has changed dramatically. The way we live, the way we purchase groceries, the way we congregate with friends, everything was turned upside down. So what you see here on the left part of the slide are the bookings according to the Open Table Network, bookings from Germany, United Kingdom, so Britain, US, and then globally. All of them virtually came to a halt by the third week of March. So you can see that within 2 weeks, everything was in lockdown. It became clear that COVID-19 cannot be contained as easily. The idea back then was to have a short lockdown of 4 to 6 weeks in order for our hospitals not to get overwhelmed. Nobody knew how to treat those with serious condition, whether you should put them in a prone position or on a ventilator. We had 3,000 deaths a day by beginning of April. And this had a dramatic effect on dairy markets because roughly half of our cheese and butter prior to COVID-19 were consumed through food service channels. So think about all the diners or fancy restaurants where fine dining restaurants where you would go and sit down and they would serve you bread and butter. We tended to eat more butter in our meals outside the home than at home. At home we didn't used to bake a lot other than just around in the holiday season. So the immediate aftermath of these changes was the shift from food service to retail. And of course, a lot of that first week was just a run on the grocery stores. We wanted to make sure that we had enough toilet paper in stock, that we had enough milk in stock. I was fielding questions about whether you can freeze milk. In fact, there was 1 week in late March, early April, where the fluid milk plants had to invoke their right under federal order to basically call upon any milk they wish as the buyer with the highest privileges. So a lot of extra trucks were going to the fluid milk plants, and then the packaging became the bottleneck. The entire supply chain was grappling with these changes, with these COVID-19 fallout. Many of you will remember the letters that you received sometimes in April from your processor, whether a cooperative or a private handler, telling you that they will not pay you for the last 10% of your milk. It was phrased more fancily in terms of base and over base, but that's basically what they were saying, that unless you cut back, you're going to have very high marginal cost or marginal penalty on that last pound of milk. The supply chain was just struggling to deal with the milk that suddenly did not have a home because our customers were no longer there. So sometimes in May, situations started improving for several reasons. First, it was warmer. People are already going stir crazy at home. So despite all the officials asking them to not engage in social events, they did start going back to restaurants bit by bit. Our overseas destinations, our export partners or import folks that are importing our dairy products realized that they could book cheese and powder in US cheaper than in other destinations because US was hit harder in those early days. So the export bookings were set for May, June, July, sometimes into August for the next 3 months. We wouldn't feel the full impact of that until late May, early June. And then, of course, the US government also intervened through the coronavirus food assistance payments and the food box, the Farmers to Families food box program that I will analyze in more details in just a little bit. So you can see that by September, the restaurant bookings were down only, quote unquote, only 40% year over year, but this has now become even worse, of course, with the most recent third wave of infections as the cold weather set in. And I do believe, and I do agree with officials that saying that, like in the aftermath of Thanksgiving, we will see another wave just before Christmas over the next few weeks. We've seen the similar pattern after Memorial Day and after Labor Day as well. When you look at retail sales, we had this big initial jump. Everybody was in panic. We at home were trying to buy a new freezer chest, and we couldn't find models that we liked because the Home Depot was empty, the Lowe's were empty of all the freezers. Everybody was buying a freezer to try to freeze more food. You're just not sure whether the regular way of supplying provisions for your family will be there tomorrow. But that initial, shall we say, panic or anxiety quickly set into a new normal. So whereas the initial weeks have seen year-over-year growth in retail sales that were double digits, sometimes a dramatic, like butter up 85% in the week of March 15th, 59% March 29th. By April, that started to slow down, and by September, while we are still seeing very meaningful increases in year-over-year sales, cheese, most recent data that I have through October 4th, 11% year-over-year higher in September, and then year-to-date 14% higher. Butter as well in retail. So the question is whether retail sales were able to fully compensate for this, and I'll have a slide on that in a moment. But I first want to review what happened very recently with vaccines. The new messenger RNA technology that was used for the first time to develop new vaccines in response to COVID-19 is really a marvelous breakthrough discovery. So I have here the timeline for one of the manufacturers, Moderna. Moderna is a new company when it comes to vaccines. They've never brought the vaccine to market before, but they have this new technology, and they figured we can apply them to vaccine development. And take a look at their timeline. It was just 2 days after China shared the genetic sequence of the COVID-19 virus that Moderna finished sequencing it for its vaccine. And the first batch ready for clinical trial was ready just less than a month after that. By late February, they started a phase 1 clinical study. Phase 1 just means try it on a few individuals and see if they die. I mean, I'm caricaturing, but that's basically what it is. The first phase is to see the maximum safe dose before the side effects become too severe. And then the phase 2 trial started in April. The massive enrollment in phase 3 trials, so tens of thousands of volunteers, that was completed in October. And then finally, just a few days ago, 2 weeks ago, we finally got the first interim results of their phase 3 study, 94.5% efficacy. So somewhere in the range of condoms, right? Like you still need to be careful who you take to bed, but like it's much better than not using it. So I'm looking forward to getting vaccinated once the vaccine is available. I do believe that the Pfizer and Moderna and AstraZeneca, the 3 vaccines that are being currently in the process of getting approved, will return US to normalcy by the end of summer 2021. So what's going to happen? What's the timeline that we are looking at here? Sometimes in first 2 weeks of December, we are going to have the emergency use authorization by CDC and FDA. And then at that point, they will prioritize the health workers. They will prioritize the critical age groups, so vulnerable populations. And then January, March, we'll have a gradual rollout further. And then by June, probably these vaccines are going to be widely available. And by end of summer 2021, I believe that we will see the end of pandemic in US. Probably this illness is going to be endemic in a sense that we will never get rid of flu. We will never get rid of this virus. We will not extinguish it, eliminate it the way we did with polio, for example. But we will be able to return back to normalcy. And the biggest uncertainty will be whether it's sufficient to get vaccinated once, or do you have to get vaccinated every year or every few years? We don't know that yet because we just don't have enough track record here. This is probably the area where the current administration doesn't get enough credit. The Operation Warp Speed was indeed a success. Of course, the timing of the rollout of the vaccine efficiency results perhaps was political. It did happen right after the elections as opposed to right before the elections. If it did happen right before the election, it's quite possible that we would have Trump continuing to his second term, because the elections were actually quite close, quite closer than any polls would suggest. But this is good news for us. At the end of the day, rapid vaccine development and the ability to distribute this over the next few months means that by summer 2021, we will be back to the well, good old days, if you will, like back to the normal life as we know it. Our kids will be able to go back to school. We will be able to go back to work, and not just some habits will change permanently. Now that folks understand how much can be done remotely and how inefficient a lot of meetings, in-person meetings really were, I think that we will see more demand for hybrid modes of work. Maybe you work from home Fridays or Fridays and Mondays, and you're at work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or something along those lines. It's going to be important to see our coworkers, but there'll be a lot of commuter miles saved by working from home as well. So overall, when you look at domestic commercial disappearance, think of that as a proxy for sales. We don't observe all the sales directly, but sort of like tracking an animal, not by seeing a bear, but tracking the bear's footsteps in snow. That's what commercial disappearance is to sales. So we look at the beginning and ending stocks. We look at how much was produced within a period. We look at how much was exported, and we net out what must have been the sales in the country. But we don't call it sales because we don't know how much went to private stocks that we don't observe. So we call it commercial disappearance. So commercial disappearance for the latest month for which USDA published this data, and that is September, indicates that year-on-year growth in American cheese is 10%, in butter is over 10%, between 10 and 12 and 15%. The big question is how much is this due to government support, and how much is this due to just plain old sales, commercial sales? So unfortunately, the answer is that a lot of it is due to government support, and I believe that at least 60% of this growth in cheese, in particular, year-over-year growth, is indeed due to government purchases for the food box program. So therefore, my first story that I'm now completing is that COVID turned our world upside down. It shifted the demand from food service to retail, and the world is coming back to normalcy by summer 2021. But now we have to focus. We need to zero in on policy programs that were implemented in 2020, and we need to carefully analyze whether they will be extended into 2021 or not. So the Farmers to Families Food Box Program served multiple purposes. If you think back to April and May of 2020, we had fresh vegetables being harvested that if they are not distributed rapidly, they would rot. It's not like you can store it like you can store butter and cheese and then they age gracefully. Carrots don't age gracefully. Lettuce doesn't age gracefully. You have to distribute it. You have to move it, otherwise it rots. So that was the first problem, how to deal with perishable goods. Second, overnight, we've seen tens of millions of Americans furloughed or laid off. The unemployment skyrocketed to the extent that we have never seen before, from month to month. And those people struggle. We don't always have 3, 4, 6 months worth of set aside money for emergency like this. Most of us live paycheck to paycheck from first to first of the month, or from one check to another. So there was a need to provide quickly implemented program that would provide this additional nutrition assistance to folks in a way that maybe food stamps would be too slow to address this very quick transition. And then, of course, the third aspect of the food box program was political. President Trump understood very well that in order to win the second term, he needs Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, the three states that delivered Republican presidency back in 2016. All three states are very heavy dairy states, and if the food box program would be very generous to dairy farmers, the thinking went, then the chances of winning those 3 states would be increased. And that's the political aspect of this program. In fact, when the Republican National Convention took place back in August, a dairy farmer from Wisconsin was given a primetime spot on Monday night to explain how the Trump administration helped dairy farmers. It was supposed to be, it was supposed to communicate and to rally a community to vote for the Republican candidate and secure the second term. They came very close, but ultimately that goal was not achieved in none of the 3 states that were targeted. In Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, the margin was still in Biden's favor, and as of yesterday, all 3 states have now certified their election results, and on December 14th, the electors will formally vote for a Democratic candidate, Joe Biden. Back to the food box program, they plan to close it twice, and then they did it. So this is Secretary Perdue back in late September saying no more food box, like we are not going to do it again. And then, of course, they did do it again. It was renewed again for November and December of 2020, albeit at half the size that it was previously offered. It used to be about $1 billion, and now it's 500 million. So let's take a look at what was the effect of these policies on dairy markets. If you look at the spot cheese market over the course of this year, if you draw a graph like this, and if you were able to share it with any dairy analyst on January 1, they will tell you you're crazy. They will tell you that you got something wrong. You probably pulled the wrong data. If you indeed are from the future, that's not on this planet, because cheese doesn't go from $1 per pound to $3 per pound over a course of 2 months. That just doesn't happen. It did happen in 2020. This is your food box program here, and this is your food box program here. And they say that a camel is a horse designed by a committee. Well, now you have a camel here that wasn't designed by a committee. It was designed by Ivanka Trump and the close advisors around President Trump. That is also the reason why this program is very unlikely to survive the transition to Biden administration. This is a signature Trump achievement. This is a signature Trump program. Any food box distributed this year came with a letter signed by the president himself. Of course, I mean, not individually signed anyone, but you know what I mean. So this was as much of a political program as it was a hunger program and the ag support program. And for those reasons, I really do not believe that chances are high at all that this program is going to continue into 2021. So, the adage says, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. But what does it really mean to be fooled here? Are you fooled because you did use risk management and they extended the program so you did not get indemnities on your class 3 endorsements in the 4th quarter? Or would you be fooled to believe that this program is going to continue into 2021 just because it happened 3 times already in 2020? That's the big question. And my 2 cents is that we really need to be looking at fundamentals rather than past policy behavior in 2020, because there are no federal elections in 2021. They do not have to vie for farmers' votes. And if you read the tea leaves from the Biden administration early press releases and notes, it's all about hunger policy, environmental sustainability. And I'll have a little bit more on the ag transition within the in ag as part of the Biden-Harris assuming power. So I'll talk about it in a little bit. But the bottom line, when it comes to food box, I really do not see that continuing into 2021, and that's going to be a big factor that will inform my forecast for the first 2 quarters of next year. A lot of you are also justifiably aggrieved by the erratic behavior of producer price differential in Northeast. So I have here 20-year history of producer price differential in Federal Order 1 that covers New York and parts of other states. And you can see that over 20-year history, we have never seen PPDs even close to this large negative numbers that we've experienced in summer and then again in October of this year. So what is driving this PPD in October, for example? It was $4.54 negative in October. The good news for you guys in Northeast is that it's not driven by deep pooling to a large extent. There's a little bit of deep pooling going on, not nearly to an extent that it's going on in Michigan or Wisconsin or Minnesota or Iowa or other parts of the country. What is happening in Northeast is that the biggest problem is the spread between class 3 and class 4. So class 4 price powder and butter, it's mostly driven still by the situation in the world market and the oversupply of milk. So class 4 prices are still fairly low. On the other hand, class 3 prices until very, very recently were really high because the food box program bought a lot of cheese, which then increased the price of cheddar cheese, which then increases the value of protein under the federal orders. And then because not all of your milk goes to cheese, in fact, only about 40% of milk in Northeast is priced through the class 3 mechanism, whether it's class 3 or half of class 1. So you have to pay for all the skim solids in the pooled milk based on the protein price, but only 40% of those skim solids really generate the value that you have to pay. So everybody else then of course has to subsidize that, and that's your negative PPD. So the spread between 3 and 4, very high class 3 prices because of food box and very low class 4 prices, that's what's driving your negative PPD in October. And then the second part what's driving PPD in October is this huge rally that we had. So as you know, the class 1 prices are set on the 3rd week of the prior month. So if you have a rally after you set the class 1 price, then the bottlers don't contribute to the pool based on the value of milk in the current month, but based on what the value of milk was in the prior month. And that contributed about $2 negative to almost $2 negative to your PPD. So why I say that this is a good news, because in particular in Northeast, with a proper hedging strategy of allocating about 55% of your milk to class 4 and 45 to class 3, to a large degree, you would your indemnities on the class 4 endorsements would compensate for at least this part of PPD here due to the class 3-4 spread. That's not the case in other parts of the country. Their PPD is a much bigger nightmare, and it's giving me a lot of headaches. But in Northeast, because of the way your order is designed, because of very tight repooling rules, you do have the ability to protect against negative PPD by using class 4 endorsements, partially, not fully, not perfectly, but partially. So anyway, what can we expect with the food box program going forward? I don't believe it's going to happen under Biden, but what I'm not sure of is whether we will have a swan song from President Trump. So what's a swan song? Here's another metaphor that's fancy. Swan song means it's a metaphor, according to Wikipedia, it's a metaphorical phrase for a final gesture, effort, or performance just before death or retirement. In this case, President Trump stepping down from power, which means that it is entirely possible, it's entirely plausible that President Trump will not want to leave any discretionary funds in the USDA budget available to Biden administration to spend as they please. They might just run down those funds. There's still, from what I'm hearing, there's still a few $1 billion left in the CFAP bucket that has not been distributed, and I would not be at all surprised if over the next few weeks we see one last swan song from Trump administration that either distributes money to CFAP or does one last round of food purchases through the food box. But come January 20th, you can forget about it. We are going to be talking about budget deficit. We are going to be talking about food stamps, other environmental sustainability, zero carbon. I would be highly surprised if we end up continuing to talk about the food box program after January 20th. So here's how to think about the food box program impact on futures markets. Futures markets are at the essence a betting place. yes, there are risk management plays, but there are also betting plays. We need speculators. Speculators are there to make money. They make money if they're better than others in figuring out what will happen next before others see that. So what I have on the left part of this slide is the true betting market on who's going to win presidential election. And you can see that in Biden was winning, was at about 60% chance for a long time. Then on the evening of November 3rd, on the election night evening, for a brief period of time, Trump went up as the results from Ohio and Florida were trickling in, as it became clear that President Trump will win Florida. But then very soon thereafter, Biden skyrocketed to almost 90%. It's still not at 100%. That is that lesson that I want to infer for dairy market. Biden is still not at 100% in betting markets. Why? Because there might still be some legal action or state legislature action that can modify or influence the election results, at least in the bettor's eyes. In the same way, no matter how many times we tell that the food box is not going to happen, future markets is still assigning some positive probability that it will happen. And as every day passes without announcement of the new food box, the chances of the food box being renewed is lower and lower and lower, and the futures price goes lower and lower and lower. So I do anticipate that as we head through December, we are going to, sometimes maybe mid-December, we are going to see class 3 prices for the first, potentially also second quarter of 2021 start going down again, because if there is going to be a last-minute announcement on food box, it's going to happen sometimes in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And if it doesn't happen, then the markets are like, okay, that's it. It's not going to happen again. Now we have to move on. So that there's still a little glimmer of hope among traders that there's going to be a food box, but as that hope dies down, the prices are going to continue to slide down through the month of December. That's at least my forecast here. So that's my second story on policy lessons from 2020 into 2021. I don't believe that we are going to see interventions that are as ad hoc as we had in 2020. And if we do end up having dairy specific shocks, do not expect system specific interventions. In 2020, we had a system shock. All ag sectors were affected, pigs and cattle and veggies and crops and dairy. So you needed a policy that affects everyone. And that's why CFAP, that's why food box. But in 2021, as I will argue in the next few slides, we are going to see some dairy specific shocks. And for dairy specific shocks, you need dairy specific cures. You have the cure already available. It's called DRP and it's called DMC. So we need to talk about those cures next. And I want to spend a few minutes talking about dairy margin coverage, not the dairy RP. We'll talk about dairy RP next, but I want to spend a few minutes talking about dairy margin coverage. Dairy margin coverage is an incredibly generous program to dairy producers. For every $1 that you pay in premiums, you get $9 back in gross indemnities over last 10 years, at least you would. What I have here is a farm with 200 cows in Northeast, using the data for Northeast Dairy Farm Summary through 2019, and the light green is are the numbers from the Farm Credit publication, and the dark green is the add-on that dairy margin coverage would have added to the net household income for someone who can cover all of their milk with their production history. And you can see that it would turn 2009 completely around in 2012 because of the high corn prices and soybean meal prices. It would dramatically increase profitability. Take a look at 2015 and 16 and 18, where the net household income was basically down to zero. So dairy margin coverage would have lifted it up to maybe $1 or $2 per hundredweight. Again, this is on a farm that can cover all of their milk with a tier 1 coverage. If there was ever a program that was easy to use and a no-brainer, it's dairy margin coverage. So, educators are often told they should be very circumspect in how they recommend. I can't be circumspect. This is a no-brainer. Like, if you don't do this, you better have either moral or religious reasons for not doing it, and I will respect that fully. But if you're not doing it just because you believe the premiums are too high, or you believe it's not going to pay out, or some other reasons, you're wrong. Okay, you're wrong. No, this is a great program that should be used by every dairy farmer in the country. You can take a look at dairymarkets.org/DMC for a tool that Mark Stevenson and I built on this. I get no commission, by the way, from this program. I get no benefits, indirect or direct. I had a grant from USDA, barely covered my cost for building the tool. So I did it as a true public good, just because I like you guys. So DMC is truly a great program. In the interest of time, I'll skip a few of these. This is what's concerning about it. In 2020, Minnesota, so the state where dairy producers cannot escape from my voice, so I like they don't sign up, I show up at their farm at 3 o'clock. I don't, but you know what I mean. Like here we built a really strong coalition between the trade association, extension agents, FSA, and myself. And in 2020 we had 80% of dairy farms in Minnesota signed up for DMC. In New York, only 29% of farms signed up. As of yesterday, for 2021, only 1 in 4 dairy farms in New York signed up for DMC. We'll have a Q&A later. I would love to hear your reasons. I hope that you go and visit your FSA shop over the next 9 days. The deadline is December 11th. Everybody needs to use this program. You're going to need it in 2021, unfortunately. It costs you 15 cents. Average return over the last 10 years, $1.30, $1.38. That's $9 back for every dollar that you put into this program. If you don't want to use it, just give me a call. Maybe you can use it on my behalf. I would love that return on investment. So dairy margin coverage, no brainer. Go visit with your FSA office as soon as we're done with this webinar. But let's talk about our next category of risk. Oops. This is the DFA. Yeah. So what happened here is that I recently presented at a conference where they had me submit my slides before, and then for those slides that I've recycled for today, the audio was unfortunately still embedded. So if you just give me a second to remove that, please. Okay, I think we're good now. All right, so now let's finally talk about what 2021 will bring and how you can hedge against it. What I see as the biggest short-term risk over the next 6 months is the cheese oversupply, because we are having a major new cheese plant in Michigan. The construction was completed a month ago. They are in a ramp-up process. They are in the process of commissioning the plant, just testing whether all the steel pipes are working, whether they have the good recipe for cheese, whether all the protocols are in place, the people are well trained. So their final capacity will be 8 million pounds of milk per day, which translates to 800 pounds of cheddar cheese per day. So that's that's 20 carloads a day, isn't it? So that's a lot. It's going to gobble up 20% of Michigan milk supply, and by summer of between this plant and some other expansions that are happening, by summer 2021 we're going to have 7% more cheese produced in the country than we have in 2020. This is my alarm saying that I'm out of time, so I'll have to cut it a bit short. 7% more cheese. Typically, our domestic demand grows by 1 to 2% per year. So unless we find a way to export dramatically more cheese than we are today, we are going to have cheese oversupply. So my single biggest advice to all of you, in addition to dairy margin coverage, is to talk to your crop insurance agent and to put in coverage for that part of your milk that is exposed to class 3 for the first and second quarter of 2021. If you have to start somewhere, start there. It's going to be a good investment. Unfortunately, the window of opportunity for really good, attractive prices for Q1 is closed already. I've been harping on this for 8 weeks now already on various webinars, and I've been unfortunately right. The price collapsed about $1.50 over the last 2 weeks for the first quarter of 2021. Second quarter of 2021 still looks attractive. It's not $20 milk. You're not going to see that, but if you act swiftly, you still have a window of opportunity to lock in decent prices for the second quarter of 2021, particularly in class 3. The second problem we are facing is that the help that we had from the U.S. government was a little bit too good. in 2020. And the best cure for high prices, as we know, are high prices. What that means is that we're going to see more milk supplied. So for 2 months in a row already, for both September and October, our milk supply is growing over 2% year over year. Even if we had robust domestic demand, such a high growth in milk supply would present problems for market equilibrium prices and would push the prices down. In Upper Midwest, spot milk is now trading $5 under class. I skipped the slide that I had on that before in the interest of time. So between more cheese processing capacity, less government intervention, and more milk supply, I think that the downside risk to class 3 prices in the first quarter of next year, 2021, is much bigger than the upside potential. So even if I'm wrong, I think that the chances are, even if I'll turn out to be wrong, I think the chances are, unfortunately, that I will be correct on this, and that the class 3 Q1 and Q2 prices will go down relative to what they are today. A little bit on reshuffling DC. Colin Peterson from my state, no longer he was not re-elected, so the next chair of the House Committee on Agriculture most likely is going to be Representative Jim Costa here, milking cows in a nicely ironed white shirt, which is usually how you milk cows. And why does this matter? Costa is from California. California makes a lot of bulk butter and powder. It doesn't make sense to try to buy a lot of powder because that's a world market. But our butter is a little bit divorced from the world prices. So it's entirely possible that we will see a resurgence of USDA interest in buying bulk dairy commodities. But again, I wouldn't assign too high a probability on that. It's just a rumor at this point that's been circulating, and we'll see what happens in the next few weeks and months. As far as the USDA goes, these are the two contenders for the new Secretary of Agriculture, current Senator Highcamp from North Dakota, and then a representative whose last name I forgot, from Ohio, but she's very active in the hunger and food security space. Why am I putting that there? Because the chances are actually fairly decent that USDA will refocus, as I said before, on the support for nutrition and sustainability, in a way stepping away from aggressive support for farm programs. I don't believe that DRP is going to go away. I don't believe that DMC is going to go away. I think that dairy safety net, touch wood, is very solid. But I would be hard pressed to put my money on any ad hoc programs beyond those two to support farm prices. Just a final slide. I understand I'm a little over here. Who's using DRP and how much? So what I have here, blue bars are the total pounds protected for the first quarter of next year, and then the little bubbles are the percentages, protected pounds divided by what was produced in the first quarter of this year in those same states. And what's giving me some chest pain is that New York is down at only 12% of milk production. Pennsylvania down at only 6%. Vermont down to only 11%. Guys, look what Texas is doing. Texas is, 52% of their milk is covered. Idaho, Wisconsin, California, about a third of their milk is covered. Look at this South Dakota. South Dakota covered 70%. For the first quarter of next year, they covered 70% already of what they made in 2020. If we have a collapse of cheese prices, who do you think is going to balance the market? Is it going to be Texas or New York, given that Texas has half of their milk covered and New York has only 12%? We really got to wake up. This is a competitive marketplace. And as much as you can call Texas and South Dakota and California your peers and sort of brothers in arms, if you will, in the same industry, they're also your competitors. And they're, at least at this point, they're better protected than you. And that does not bear well for you. It's not a good omen. So I would strongly encourage all my friends and producers in New York to wake up, and get their risk management programs in place for 2021, because others are ahead of you at this time. If you look nationally, we are now at a point where about a third of the milk, or 30% of the milk, is getting covered by DRP, and I think this 22% for January, March. It's really 27% when you account for protection factor. I think that we're going to be at about 30% as well by the end of the sign-up period, December 15th here. So we are no longer at the times like when we were 7-8 years ago. Then if prices drop, oh, Texas is going to lose 25,000 cows, and then the prices are going to go up. And then even smaller dairies that up until recently were unfortunately the ones balancing the market through their exits, now they have dairy margin coverage, and hopefully they will also use it. Which means that for those mid-sized dairies that are not terminal generation dairies, but they want to transition and keep the dairy in the family for foreseeable future and longer, it's high time to get engaged in risk management. It's almost not optional anymore. And unfortunately, evolution does not operate through consensus. 10 years from today, those of you that listen to me will still be in business. Those of you that don't, well, I hope you stay in business, but I would be hard pressed to say that your success is guaranteed, because your competitors in your state, in Upper Midwest, in Southwest, they will be ahead of you in risk management. They will be better protected in case of any price declines. And sure, there might be some quarters where you will feel superior because you didn't spend a quarter, you didn't spend 25 cents on premiums, and they did, and they didn't get an indemnity. But then another quarter, prices will collapse, and you will be like, where's my food box? And then you will realize that Biden is the president and there's no food box. And a positive PPD doesn't help either when the prices are down at the $12, $13 per hundredweight. So it's time to move. It's time to move. It's time to put in risk management in place. Whether you want to use LGM or DRP or futures or something, but you got to act because others are, and it's a competitive marketplace. We are, I'm going to skip some of these things here. So ultimately, when it comes to DRP, how to budget for it, and I'll wrap up with this slide. So the question is, okay, so you've decided you want to do it. How much money should you set aside for it? There are 4 factors that I believe you should take into consideration when budgeting DRP. First, effective hedging means distant hedging. Not, yes, I'm telling you hedge Q1 and Q2 now because we have a looming crisis, but you should definitely start layering in Q3 and Q4 for 2021 for both class 3 and 4. So in general, distant hedging is what will get you effective hedging. Think about those that wanted to cover their class 4 exposure for 2020. Unless they covered the entire year before COVID struck, they were out of luck, because once the COVID struck, the entire future term structure for class 4 was down for next 12 to 15 months. When crises come, they tend to stay with us for a few quarters. So you have to cover a few quarters before the crisis comes. Distant hedging, effective hedging, but distant hedging is not the cheapest hedging. Second, if you're using 95% coverage level, and vast majority of people are, for every $100 that you pay in premium, over time, you will generate $170 to $180 in income over time, like over many years, over, like maybe 1 year you will not, then the other year will get much more. But when you average it out over time, for every $100 you pay in, you'll get back about $180. It's an excellent ROI. The only thing that beats it is the dairy margin coverage, which is a farm bill program. But you know what it means? It means that if you budget 35 cents, then over time, your indemnities will average about 60, 62 cents, and your net income will go up by 27 cents. 27 cents net income higher is a good reward for effective and disciplined and principled risk management program. And you get that through a subsidized, through the taxpayer paid subsidies on the DRP. Third point, don't use mixed endorsements. If you want to cover class 3 and class 4, cover them on separate endorsements. I think Greg is going to speak about this more, so I won't take it further than that. And then finally, lenders love producers with superior risk management discipline and execution. So if your farm can generate return on investment, return on assets, if your farm can generate return on assets that higher than the interest rate on the loans that you can get from Farm Credit East or other lenders, then your return on equity will grow faster if you are more leveraged. And if you use DRP to demonstrate to your lenders that you have a superior risk management program, that you're disciplined, that you're in it for the long haul, they just may allow you to be a little more leveraged. And that means that your return on equity is going to be increased through use of DRP, which is an often forgotten aspect. I guess everywhere except South Dakota, they figured it out. So all things considered, I believe that an appropriate budget for DRP, and your consultants may be more conservative than this, but I believe that a reasonable budget is in the 30 to 35 cents range. If you do that, then long term you will increase your net farm income by 27 cents net farm income. So after recovering all the premiums paid, and you will have a much more stable income, which will allow your lenders to be comfortable with a higher leverage, allowing you to grow your equity faster as well. So I'll stop here. We'll have an Ask the Experts session in the end as well. Feel free to ask anything, and if we run out of time, we can continue this conversation in our bi-monthly webinars for dairy producers that will be offered exclusively to farm credit, to crop growers clients, and I believe that others will follow up on that at the end of this webinar. So stay tuned for that. I'm available to producers every other Wednesday, and we do this kind of deep dives in various aspects of dairy economy every other Wednesday, and we typically have almost 100 people every other Wednesday. So it's a good use of your time. Chris, back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marin. And yeah, there will be a special offer for a free trial of that dairy market update service following Greg's presentation, following our presentation today. I'll now turn it over to Gregg McConnell, who will talk some more about dairy markets and what's in store for the coming year.
All right, let's do a.
So right there at the top, display setting. Yep, swap, presenter view, and slideshow.
There we go.
All right,
there you go.
Are we good? Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks for the help. I appreciate it. So, good afternoon, everyone. Just a quick bio. Business consultant with Farm Credit East. I work in the Finger Lakes region of New York, and I cover an area that's roughly described as east of Route 81 and just a little past Route 390, so that you can kind of envision that I'm right squarely in that Finger Lakes and slightly west area. And I do a fair amount of consulting on a variety of topics, but the dominant type of consulting I do is financial consulting, and mostly with dairy farms. So today we're going to talk about market volatility and basically how, as a consultant, I would advise my clients in exercising the opportunities for risk management. So first of all, volatility, what's around the bend? Well, Marin gave us some great insight. 2020, definitely a black swan event. You're going to hear a lot of animal metaphors today. I won't be any exception, but a few less of them. But I think when we see 2020 for what it was, it's a different scale of volatility than I think the market normally will absorb. That came to us both in class 3 prices as well as even class 4, and then the PPD, of course. So that kind of volatility is a different scale. And I would say, let's be careful. Could it be a mistake to assume 2021 will be a repeat? What I mean by that is, if we're making our risk management decisions based on the outcomes that we had in 2020, I think that's a mistake, possibly. But nevertheless, it's still important to do it, and we'll talk about that. So risk management during quote-unquote normal times is kind of when we're back to normal market forces without what Marin called policy-induced markets. So I made some prior recommendations through a couple of different webinars with some of you might have seen before, but I'll review them very quickly. So when we're talking about risk management for milk price, I think the first steps are these 4 items. Know your risk profile. What I mean by that first point is you got to know why you're doing risk management in the first place and how deeply you're going to pursue it. So knowing your debt per cow, liquidity metrics, your percent equity, all of those are very important and can be done very easily through a benchmark program to try to figure out how risky is your business in terms of the balance sheet and other factors. The second step is know what your cost structure is. what's your net cost of production? What's your break-even milk price? Being able to calculate those accurately, we're going to discuss that a little more today, but that is one of the keys to being very competent in risk management. In addition to that, know your basis. Understand why your milk check varies from class 3 or 4 and what drives it. So understanding that, we're going to touch that a little bit today as well. And then finally, develop a risk management plan. A risk management plan should be in writing, and it should be a plan that helps you avoid the emotion aspect of what what risk management is about. It helps you have that discipline that Marin talks about. So again, these are some recommendations I've made in the past, and they still apply today. Additional recommendations, I generally advise higher of class 3 or 4. In other words, in the Northeast, and that's what the audience we're talking to today, in general, both classes will impact your milk price significantly. So it doesn't bother me which class we use. I am just an advocate for getting the highest floor for your money possible. Generally, as Marin just said here at the close of his presentation, I want to go as far out as I can. I know it's more expensive, but that's where we can sometimes get an upset in the market and capture the highest floor we possibly can. In the near term, a lot of the factors, supply and demand, are already known, and they're already known by the players in the industry. When using both classes, class 3 and 4, if you're going to do that at the same time, let's do it in separate endorsements. Just like Marin mentioned, these are advice that we've come up with because we've seen the impact of doing it the other way. And then finally, when class 3 and 4 are very close together, very similar in price, I generally weight class 4 slightly higher, just because over the past 2 cycles, and I know that doesn't make a trend, but over the past 2 cycles, it's had a counter-cyclical benefit when we've had low PPD. So when class 3 is kind of making a jump and class 4 is kind of low, what tends to happen is we get a negative PPD. So if we've contracted to class 3, we don't always get that outcome that we were looking for. But if we've contracted to 4, we oftentimes get the bump right when we need it the most. So again, these aren't ironclad, but they are general recommendations. So today's presentation is going to be just a little bit different. With those prior recommendations in mind, let's ask ourselves, what's your budget for risk management expense in 2021? What's likely to happen to milk price? And I think after Marin's conversation, we're going to keep that conversation in my presentation short. What's likely to happen to feed price, and how confident are you in that projection? What is your budgeted net cost of production or break even for 2021, and how is that going to impact your risk management decision? And finally, how do you project basis for 2021 when our PPDs kind of confounded that process? So let's take a look at this. First off, risk management budget. How high, how much should you spend? Well, first of all, premiums are a lot higher than they were a year ago. So first of all, I agree 100% with Marin, and this is a change in recommendation that I had earlier, actually late in 2019. That was a specific recommendation for a specific time. At this point, when you look at all the opportunities for risk management, how can you do better than DMC? 15 cents a hundredweight for your first 5 million pounds for a very, very high and effective floor. So the real question is, how much are you going to spend to protect milk over 5 million pounds? So first takeaway from my presentation, if you haven't already signed up, before December 11th, go to the USDA office and sign up for DMC for up to the first 5 million pounds on your farm. So let's take a look at the rest of your milk. Looking at the Northeast dairy benchmark data on a $1 per hundredweight basis, take a look at the last 4 years, and wow, that milk price varied quite a lot. Notice that net cost of production steadily grew over time. We see a net cost of production in 2016 of $16.79, quite an attractive net cost of production, with growth of over $1 over that 4-year period. Take a look at net profit. Net profit actually bottomed out in 2018 in this presentation here of data, and 2019 was our best year. If you consider your risk management strategy, let's just for theoretical purposes say on 100% of all your milk, how much income, net income, would you give up to stabilize your milk price? Now, Marin mentioned 35 cents. I'm using the same sort of kind of a soft number. With 35 cents, what would that do? Well, it represents 68% of your 4-year average profit, which only was 51 cents. So in a sense, sorry to use almost a pun there, you know, it feels like it's too much to invest 35 cents, okay? And that's the first place I would land with it. But if we shift gears a little bit and look at 35 cents a hundredweight, what does that represent on a net cost of production basis? Well, let's use the most recent net cost of production at 1781. It comes up to 2%. It would, in essence, it would add 2% to your cost, if you will. That doesn't sound quite as bad, does it? And I think that's a better way to look at it. A third way to look at it is, what would it be as a percent of your 4-year average milk price? And it would have represented a 2% reduction in your 4-year average milk price. So I put the exact number down, 1.96, but you get the drift. So really, 35 cents, frankly, is a lot of money. If a lot of my clients would average around 1,200 cows, but let's use 1,000 cows milking 26,000 pounds of milk a year. If we invest 35 cents, that's 91,000 a year. How many years are you going to write a check for 91,000 if it doesn't pay out regularly? Let's not kid ourselves. I have had clients get kind of grumpy about their DRP premiums. So I understand probably as much as anybody out there what it costs, the discouraging prospect of writing those checks quarterly. However, if we consider over the same 4-year period, what would the indemnities from DRP have done? Would they have offset the premiums? Now, we've seen some of that already in the past 2 years. We've seen some periods where farmers go through and half their premiums are covered because they almost hit the floor. And that's not a good thing. It would have been a good thing if the price was higher, right? But nevertheless, we saw that we got close enough to the floor where we offset half of our premiums or all of our premiums in a quarter. And then occasionally, and then in 2020, we saw quite a few of these, we see money coming to your bottom line, significant income. So over that 4-year period, how much would have paid out? Well, I will recommend that you go out, first of all, get connected to crop growers insurance and use their proprietary DRP decision support tool. And we'll take a look at it later, but you can evaluate the historical payout quite handily. So what's my recommendation? Well, first of all, with today's premium ranges, 20 to 50 cents a hundredweight, I would say I am not in favor for my average farm going at 100% of their milk. I'm just not. There are farms who, with high risk profiles, I could see 80, 90, 100%, but that's the highest end. So in my opinion, based on just the experience that I've had with this so far, and I reserve the right to change my mind later, that I would say I'm not going to advise that heavy of risk management all the time for my average client. However, I think you should go after this and learn it, and I think you should use it as a significant tool. Matter of fact, I've seen quite a bit of benefit, even at 30% coverage, some significant checks coming to my clients over the last year. So just because you're not 100% doesn't mean you're not in the game. So higher costs, what is it? It leaves you with the following choices. When I say higher costs, a year ago, we could have done anywhere from 8 cents to 25 cents for a DRP contract. When we have higher premiums, and if we're either going to endorse less pounds, keep our budget fixed, or we're going to have to increase our budget. That's the decision to make. And yet there's a third item, and Marin alluded to it. You could go and leap to a different risk management product. What do I mean by that? Well, there's LGM, there's going out to the futures contracts, do a class 3 forward. There's fence contracts, min-max is the other word for it. But every one of those other tools, especially the fixed price forward and the fence contracts has some potential serious baggage with it. So I would say unless you are extremely comfortable and well advised in that decision, be extraordinarily careful of going outside to do something other than DMC and DRP. All right, so I think the bottom line is you're going to have to decide what your tolerance is for cost and develop your strategy and update your plan. Moving on to milk price, second of the 5 bullet points. First of all, I agree 100%. Risk of oversupply is present right today. I do see downside risk, just like Marin said, especially for class 3. Exports in October 2020, especially to China, were very robust. We're seeing in the class 4 futures right now some 30 and 40 and 50 cent pops on the class 4 prices further out next year. So maybe this will help class 4 a little bit, but I don't think it's going to come in and save the day per se. So I think overall downside risk, especially in class 3. You know, what will feed prices do? There could be eventually, if feed prices persist at this high level or the level they're going, that we could see some production cuts from people pulling back, and that might result in better prices, but I wouldn't count on it. So that's my assessment on milk price. Feed expense, which Marin didn't talk much about. First of all, the higher costs are already there, and I don't see any relief in sight. If we were sitting back in September, August, I don't think I wasn't aware that we were facing this fast of a run up in feed cost. I mean, hindsight's always 20/20, right? So feed expense will be a factor. We'll touch on that. With DMC, it's already built in protection. So again, what other product could you use after the market's already spoken and you could still lock in a good deal? DMC is the only one I'm aware of. Should you consider LGM? Probably too late. It's already built into the pricing on the next Friday, which would be the one of the last Fridays of December. So my guess is it's probably too late to use LGM. I still recommend keeping feed risk management separate from milk risk management. That might backfire on us on 2021. But note that I didn't say don't do it. I'm saying keeping it separate. So my recommendation is, if you haven't done so already, contact your feed dealer, your broker about feed contracts, and make that decision about whether to or not to lock in your price. By the way, for some of some of you out there, feed cost is a moot point. If you had a good year, you might have enough grain this year, you should be all set. I mean, certainly it's going to impact your protein prices for most of you. But for the big hit to your financials, it may or may not be there. For others of you, you went through a drought, and this will be a huge factor. The next point is know your costs for 2021. Now, this is a huge part of my presentation. First of all, understand the impact of the USDA payments on your net cost of production or break even. Learn how to adjust your 2020 numbers, and then let's give you some insight on how to do a projection. So first of all, if we review net cost of production versus break-even price, this simple sort of presentation here on the screen should give you a sense for what's going on. Basically, net cost of production is much better for benchmarking purposes. It's not debt neutral, but it's a little insulated from debt levels, and it's related to, it uses depreciation in the cost structure. Break-even milk price replaces depreciation with principal payments. When I say that, that is scheduled, minimally scheduled principal payments on your term debt. And then it also includes income taxes in it as well, in most cases. Bottom line is that break-even, if it's accurately calculated, is probably your better tool for risk management, but again, it's less benchmarkable. But as we consider the impact of 2020 on our numbers, keep in mind that on both calculations, we subtract non-milk income to end up at a price, a remaining residual expense that we then relate to your gross milk check. So if we were to consider this in the using the Northeast Dairy Benchmark net cost of production, of course, this is the publication that measures about 300 dairy farms around the Northeast. And we do it every year. We release it somewhere around, I think it's June or May. So these numbers came from last year, but as you can see, non-milk income is included in that net cost of production as well. So what does this mean? Well, CFAP 1 and 2 will greatly impact the traditional net cost of production calculation. In addition, if there was risk management gains, or in some cases expense, that could either tug down or upward our non-milk income calculation. Now, keep in mind that in our consulting group, we're going to make a change on how we present that and make sure that that gets separated out from net cost of production to keep that from distorting our realities. So considering net cost of production for 2021, if we were going to project that, which I think is the best practice, first of all, I would like to stick my neck out there and say, I think we're seeing at least a 30 to 70 cent higher net cost of production break even in 2021. Why is that? First of all, feed costs, 50 cents would only be an 8% increase. I could see 70 cents easily for 2021. Labor costs 5 to 20 cents. Why am I putting that in there? In New York State, we're going through another 70-cent increase on minimum wage. Plus, it's the second full year of overtime, and the impact on most of my clients will be somewhere in that 10 to 15 cent range. But this is going to highly vary depending on how labor intense your business is. On some of my clients, it's going to be 25 cents because we're hitting a lot of overtime. And then general inflation also will be a factor, whether it be real estate taxes or whatnot. So a couple of offsetting factors that should lower us back would be interest expense. Again, depending how much debt you have, low debt, a little less impact, high debt. And if you're on variable rates, a higher impact in savings from last year. And then finally, last but certainly not least, is what about production per cow? I know a few farms are on 2020 corn silage just producing quite well. So if forages are good and we can get this thing dialed in correctly, we may offset some of that net cost of production with production of just sheer efficiency of milk per cow. So looking at 2021, I think it's safe to say an additional 30 to 70 cents higher in your net cost of production. So what are the takeaways from this section of my presentation? I would say, first of all, in 2020, your net cost of production calculation is probably going to be skewed lower by about up to $2, give or take, because of the CFAP income. A good practice in 2020 would be recalculate it without CFAP 1 and 2 and or your hedging costs or gains, to leave you with a sort of a more reliable net cost of production that is more comparable to prior years and to future year. And then our best practice would be the heck with 2020. By this point in the year, almost all my clients will have their 2020 budget already done, monthly and annual. And I think it's a best practice to base risk management on the projection for next year. When you do that, of course, don't include the effect of USDA, significant USDA money. We would include the ordinary amount, but significant hedging gains or losses, keep them out of that net cost of production calculation. So moving on to basis, early on when we've had these webinars, I've mentioned you just got to understand your basis, and this is a difficult one to walk you through for a moment because PPD has definitely confounded our ability to really understand intuitively what basis is. And if component values revert to normal and PPD doesn't go into these wild gyrations again, we're hoping that in 2021 that you should be more consistent with historical basis numbers. So how do you project basis for 2021? Well, first, just a quick look at the 70-month history of PPD on a month-over-month sort of manner. You can see with this blue line here in the graph how low PPD got. Now, this is just in the Northeast Federal Milk Order. PPD is specific to each milk order. And you can see that 2020 was just clearly an outlier, just clearly an exceptional year with low PPD. Marin did a great job of explaining that. But the thing is look how consistent we are quarter by quarter. it gets a little bit more fragged out on the fourth quarter. And I would conjecture that that is because you're going into a holiday season each year, and you either have enough, you have the perception of enough product or not enough product. So your class 3 might, accelerate as you go through the end of the year, or it might be flat. So you're going to have various PPDs here, but look how consistent PPD has been for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years out of the last 6 years. Been very consistent through the first 3 quarters. So I would argue that number one, we're going to eliminate 2021 in our basis assumptions just to get an easier way to kind of assess what basis we should use. Number two, you might be shocked at this, but I'm going to say let's de-emphasize basis in your strategy and rather focus on setting good floors relative to the class price historical averages. And I'll walk you through an example of that. And then finally, let's use basis rather than the beginning of the decision point as the last step. So as the last step, you could say, all right, I think I should do that 1650 floor. My basis is $1.50. So now I can relate my choice to my break-even milk price or net cost of production as a last step. Okay, so in other words, it's more important to get the right floor on the class price. So I'm going to transition a little bit. I'm going to just say, let's set up a strategy and learn to use the tool with respect to, trying to maximize the impact of your risk management budget. All right. So if you're going to invest $100,000 this year, $25,000 this year, what do you get for that? What do you get for that investment? Okay. And I recommend that you do set a number and pursue this and learn to use it. So here's my animal metaphor. We went through swans, black and otherwise. We went through a bear. Let me think. We went through a rhino. I can't remember what else. Here we're going to talk about a deer hunter. And it's sort of appropriate for Thanksgiving, I think, because a lot of people deer hunt, and I've done a little bit of that. I'm I wouldn't call myself an avid deer hunter, but I do a fair amount of it. So when you get together with your buddies, if you hunt in a group and you divvy up which tree stand would you prefer to sit on? I will guarantee you that group of hunters knows exactly where the honey hole is. There's 1 or 2 stands where they have had a high success rate. And which one would you prefer to sit on for 3 hours, 4 hours, maybe more? And frankly, as you sit on that stand waiting for that optional, that optimum shot to come along, both the right deer and a good shot presentation where you can make an ethical kill, it begins to feel like a long time. So how do I transfer this metaphor to our current presentation? Well, understand the laws of probability. I think with DRP, you need to set your stand in a spot that's worth the money. We talked about time on a tree stand. So if I'm sitting in the honey hole, I can wait out that 3 hours a lot better. If I've invested $25,000 and my floor is a $14 class 3, it's going to feel like a long wait to just pay that check. Okay. So if you're a higher risk farm, you might need to ignore some of my advice. You might need more blanketed coverage. But I think for some of my clients, we need to be a little more selective. So let's talk about how do you obtain an outlier floor. I like to call it outlier. Well, first of all, let's look at using the decision tool, the DRP decision tool, which is available to anyone who signs up with, for no cost, for anyone who signs up to do business for DRP with crop growers. And we can use that tool to target a quarter and figure out what's to our advantage in that quarter. So for instance, one of the things I've learned using the tool is that class prices are often lowest in the first and second quarter, and then are oftentimes higher in the third and fourth quarter. In addition, our basis history tends to be different by quarter as well. That can be confounded a bit by PPD, and it probably will be significantly confounded in the 2020 basis. But again, we'll talk about that in a minute. So try to set a floor. In my opinion, your target should be well above average if at all possible. Now don't use this 0.4 to stay out of the market. You know, if you think that you should jump in the market before it collapses. So don't. I think I'm trying to use this strategy over a long period of time. There are times where you go against what's generally a good idea, but so use this as a general suggestion. So here's the tail of two DRP endorsements. So consider whether, you know, if you had a strategy to do class 3, let's say for the first quarter, and you could have taken that down any time over the last, you know, 9 months or so. Okay. Well, if you had no target in mind, you could have ended up with these two endorsements just because they seemed right at the time, if you don't use actual statistical efforts. So in this example, an endorsement placed in April versus early November where we kind of hit it right. This is class 3. And this is the actual floor. This is the revenue guarantee. So the same quarter, radically different floor, the same exact premium. And if you're sitting on that $14 floor, you have a very low probability of getting paid out. So what was the actual average 6-year average class 3 milk price for the first quarter? It was $15.15. So if we had known that, if we had actually kept that in mind and said, hey, I want to get well above $15.15, now I'm in an outlier situation. If you can't get there, you might want to protect some milk anyway. But maybe this informs the amount of milk you do at a given moment. And so obviously when we're at $16.55, we kind of hit a good floor. So I'm going to give you an example. I'm wrapping up here. I have just several more slides, but I'm going to give you an example here using, these are screenshots of the tool. And so first of all, looking at this, this is the landing spot for most of you that use the tool. And revenue guarantee represents the actual floor. Expected revenue represents the 3-month or quarterly average of the class 3. This happens to be a class 3 price. And I happen to have on the screen a highlighted 1613, and that is the third quarter of 2021. So you can see first, second, and third quarter laid out here. Notice in your basis, expected basis, those shaded columns, you can actually customize those. You can actually edit that because it's shaded and put in an edited basis. So that might be a best strategy there. But bottom line is the historical basis automatically feeds, and notice our basis in the first quarter happens to be bigger during that as well. So keep in mind that as we look at, so we're selecting either class 3 or 4 on this particular view. We're going to focus on revenue guarantee, not expected revenue, because that's the revenue guarantee is the floor you're trying to protect. And I'm going to say let's de-emphasize this particular line here, expected revenue floor. Let's de-emphasize that, because at the end of the day, I'm not really protecting that basis with this product. So unless I trigger up here with the revenue guarantee, this basis becomes meaningless. The only way the basis becomes meaningful is when I trigger. Okay, so that's why I'd say we got to de-emphasize that expected revenue floor. So the other tab that I find less used by my clients, but I think you should use aggressively, and I included in here, I was on the premium quoter slide here, and if you go all the way to the right, this slide or tab here called Market Dynamics will reveal this screen. So the first thing I would do when I come into this particular view on the website is I click on Add a Product, and I add Class 4 Price. It gives me this teal colored line. And then the next thing I would do is sometimes it gives you such a broad history that this is meaningless data on the left, and it also influences the scale of the graph. So you can see where I've highlighted in yellow, I'll grab the slider and we'll slide that in to give me a little smaller graph over a time frame. And then the next place that I tend to focus on is the historic historical actual price. And what I'm literally doing is comparing, if I'm on class 3, I'm looking at the tip of this red line, the tip, right where I am today, and I'm comparing that price, which actually should be the same price that was on my slide before, should be that 1613 or very close to it. So that price there, I guess, that's not, I'm sorry, that was wrong. It should be at 1698 right there. Regardless, they're related to one another, but that 1698 will be that last tip. And then I look over here and I compare to the actual historical prices. Now, let's take a look at that again. So I use these sliders, I get myself a graph, and what this tells me is that right at the moment, okay, this was about 3 days ago, 2 days ago, we had the highest class 3 since April on an average for that quarter. So this was the third quarter in 2021. So I know that there was never a better time since April to grab a floor. That doesn't tell me I should do it. It just says, hey, at least I'm better than I was, because I don't know if it's going to shoot straight up or come down. Turns out, we don't know. But at least I know that I'm beating what the history was. The next thing I do is I come over here to this historical slide, and we see that the average over a 6-year period was 1693. And you can see which months that 1613 would have paid, or which years it would have paid out. It would have paid out, it would have been break even here and would have paid out once. Now note, what is the average? The straight average is 1693, but the third quarter of 2020 was tremendously influenced by that policy-induced market prices. So if we eliminate 2020, I would understand that my 5-year historical average was 1627. So what does that tell me? Well, how good is a price, a floor of 1613? The answer, it's slightly below average if I don't include 2020 data. So what do I do with that? Well, if I have no production for that quarter, I might go ahead and buy some. Why? Because it's the best opportunity I had since April 1st, okay? And no other reason than that. But it might inform me how much I do. If this was $1 over the average, I might be going in hard to get as much as I can. All right, so with that, I'm going to wind it up with this. I do believe 2021 will be a down year. We've seen dairy cycles, they tend to be every 3 years. We think 2020 presents itself, despite the weirdness of it, as the good year in a 3-year cycle. And nevertheless, a decent floor is hard to find. So, and they're a little bit pricier. So we just have to acknowledge that and get a stiff upper lip and try to do the best we can. Right now is a great time to obviously sign up for DMC if you haven't already, do your budgeting, get your risk management plan together, study the milk prices, and then endorse as the markets and your plan come into alignment. I borrowed this slide from Mike Hosterman, and thank you, Mike, for letting me borrow it. I think this is a great, and he's going to be presenting later this week for the Ag Choice customers. But planning is the key to success. Develop a plan, implement the plan, but don't forget to evaluate the plan. So when you're done with 2020, let's look back together as a team and say, how did that risk management plan do? Did we like how much we spent? Did it accomplish its goals? Were the floors high enough? And then if you don't like the result, we adjust the plan, the amount of milk, the strategy for how much, how far out, which class, et cetera, okay? And so it becomes a circular feedback loop. Mike includes here some of the key profit drivers, and we would say through benchmarking, we've seen this over and over again. Our top profit farms are ones that control the controllables. They don't get negative about things. They try to stay as positive as they can. They have a business mindset. They know they can't win all the time and every year, but they're always in the game with a sense of discipline and courage. They know there's no magic solution. So I think when you apply these key profit drivers to your risk management plan, that is an appropriate way to approach it. And I would argue now is a great time as well to step up your risk management game. Review your plan and results. Set up a written plan if you don't have one already. Think about the speed of information. This hit me in April of 2020. And the pandemic is going on and the stock market is going crazy. And I realized that compared to 5 years before or 10 years before, 2009, the speed of good or bad news hitting the numbers is way faster than it used to be. So we need resources. Learn to use the DRP decision tool. It's an extremely good tool. I'm not just saying that to butter up Marin. This is a great tool. And I can be sort of critical about software. CME app, that is a great app. If any of you have any interest in how to get it, it's free. It's a fantastic way to get, almost minute by minute updates throughout the day. Think about a subscription service to get a blog. Think about attending Marin's presentations every other week, I think it is. That opportunity will be presented to you momentarily. And then consider, if you don't do this already, consider budgeting, benchmarking, and or working with a profit team. One of these three things or all three, as I consider the difficulty and the complexity of today's world in managing a business, whether you use a consultant or a trusted advisor, these activities are becoming imperative. So with that, I am now done with the presentation and we can transfer it back to Chris for Q&A.
Thanks, Greg. So I realize that we're over time here, and I apologize for that. I do, however, want to ask some questions because we had some very good questions that came in, and we have two really great experts here at our beckon. So I'd like to ask a few questions of them. So one question here, what relates to PPD, and Marin, you might be the best one to field it. So the food box program and government interventions drove up the price of cheese, but that caused a negative PPD, if we're understanding it correctly. So what was the net at the end of the day for that? Did it really help dairy producers or not, or what do you think? You're muted, Marin, if you're trying to speak.
Yeah, sorry, I muted manually my microphone here. It definitely helped. But keep in mind that in Northeast, only about 40 to 45% of your milk price is influenced by what happens to cheese. The rest is influenced by what happens to powder and butter, etc. So the part of your milk price that depended on cheese went up. That's the protein price. If you look at your milk checks, the protein price went up. But negative PPD basically said, is there to say, look, the other 55% of your milk is not influenced by the food box. So there's those skim solids that went to yogurts, that went to the drying plant, then some of that went to the fluid milk. They don't generate the value that a skim solid, that the protein generates in cheese because of food box. So the PPD needed to offset that. So it helped, but it helped most in those areas where most milk goes to cheese. In Northeast, only about 40% to 45% of your milk is priced off the cheese. That's all of your class 3 plus half of your class 1. So the rest, is the negative PPD reflects the fact that you had to pay higher protein prices on all your skim solids, but 55% of your skim solids didn't generate that value because it's used in other classes. But net effect, that it was higher than it would have been without food box. Absolutely, no, I have no doubt about it.
Okay, so kind of building on that, what do you think about the formula for PPD in the Northeast? Do you believe it's I guess correct, for lack of a better way to put it?
Well, we can do better. We can do better. The average of will come to haunt us now in November, December, January, February, when class 3 and 4 become a little bit more closer and the cheese rally, works its way out. So that was one big change: higher off to average off. We could do better by really thinking whether we need advanced prices. Advanced prices were introduced 20 years ago because we had higher off. So then the fluid bottler said, well, we can't hedge if you have higher off. How do you hedge that? Well, now they can hedge. The whole point of going to average off is so they can hedge, but we still have advanced price. So that's a debate we need to have on that. And then there could be some other ways to represent the milk price on the milk checks, and how we price the protein, whether we should price the protein just on cheese, or maybe we should price the protein based on powder as well. It would stabilize PPD. PPD would be about $1.50, $1.60, maybe $1.70. In the actually, I need to check my files, but it would be fairly flat. It would be like just a non-factor. You would, if we priced protein in Northeast based on how it's actually used in each class, PPD would be a non-factor in volatility. It would be very, very stable from month to month. It would just reflect how much milk was used in class 1 and class 2 and the class 1 differentials. That's what basically what it would capture. But there's no free lunch right now. Those dairy herds that have high milk solids, that that invested in better genetics or maybe converted to jerseys, etc., they are getting paid on protein, and they're getting big bucks on protein, or were getting through 2020, even though that protein that they were delivering did not generate all that value. So if we move to a blended component pricing to reflect better the value that those components generate in the Northeast, then high solids herds would see slightly lower milk price. So there's no free lunch here. We cannot just create value from thin air. It's about how the value is distributed between dairy farmers. I think that one factor that is working well for Northeast that is perhaps hard to appreciate until you see what's happening with the rest of the country is depooling. In Midwest, in Michigan, in Central order, we've seen dramatic depooling percentages in 2020, which basically means that, to caricature a little bit, basically means that if you're with DFA, so you're not depooled because you own a number of fluid plants, you share that revenue with everyone when fluid contributes to the pool, but everybody bails out on you when the fluid is supposed to take money from the pool. So that can be partially addressed through doing away with advanced prices, and Northeast is good about not facilitating or making it easy to jump in and out of the pool. In other parts of the country, there's just not enough fluid milk to make it. You need the metaphors, right? The stick and the carrot. Well, the carrot is just already half eaten in the rest of the country. There's just not enough carrots to keep everyone in the pool, and and if you beat them with a stick, they'll just bail out on you forever. They'll depool forever. So long story short, there are some things that we can do about milk pricing, but more than any other regions in the country, Northeast can protect against negative PPD through proper combinations of class 3 and class 4 endorsements on DRP, with about 50-55% going to class 4 and about the 40-45% to whatever you hedge going to class 3. Now Greg is right when he says, well, higher off, but I would interpret that as like, what do you do first? Like when there is an opportunity to lock in really nice class 3 prices, maybe you jump on that first and you wait a little bit for the class 4 prices to go up, but you shouldn't wait for too long, because instead of going up, they may still go down. And then what seemed like poor prices before, may eventually seem like good old times, where you never pull the trigger.
Okay, another question that came in, or I'll actually combine a couple here. Marin showed a slide that showed the wide variation in participation in dairy risk management programs, the federal programs. Greg, why don't you go first? Do you have any thoughts as far as what might be driving the discrepancy of high enrollments in some states and then low enrollments, particularly in several Northeast states?
Well, I would say with limited information, but I think I'm close to correct, that the areas represented by high percentages are areas that's not new. They have been big into risk management in the past. So before we even had DRP, these were farms that used a lot of risk management. You look at the size and scale of the farms in those states, a lot of them are big businesses that have learned to manage risk, and they're way ahead of us on it. However, in the Northeast, we have farms that are now really scaled up and yet don't yet participate that much in risk management. And so I think that's where we need to catch up. I think Marin is correct, but that's my assessment, is that you look at North Dakota. Is it North Dakota, Marin, or was it South?
South Dakota.
South Dakota. You look at South Dakota, you know, that is a rapidly growing region. So if you're going to plunk down, let's just figuratively say a 5,000 cow dairy, you're going to plunk that down, you're going to borrow $7,000 debt per cow, and you're going to sell milk to a new cheese plant. Do you really want to go naked on that investment and not be risk managed? You're going to risk manage the heck out of that thing. And so I think that's driving some of these numbers. I do think that New York State, there is no reason, the Northeast, frankly, not just New York State, should all be doing DMC up to the extent of their pounds of milk, up to that 5 million pounds. And then we should be exercising this very nice tool of DRP to some level.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would like to add just one thing there, Chris, is that Greg is absolutely right. Texas, South Dakota, California, Idaho, they have a much bigger average herd size per farm than New York or Northeast in general. And it still takes, 45 minutes to write a single endorsement if you're an agent. You have to go to the website, punch in all the numbers, send the DocuSign, producer has to sign it, send it back. So, if you're working with a 3,000, 5,000 cow dairy, they can buy an endorsement and you make thousands of dollars in commissions as a, I'm not now pointing fingers at anyone in particular, but like that's what these, brokerages that go after, and then cherry pick producers in different states to work with, that's what they do. The reason I wanted to work with the farm credit is because your mission is to reach every single producer, and that's my mission as well. So what I want to achieve with crop growers, and I'm working with your leadership on this over the next year or two, we want to get to a point where you have a mobile app. I have it here. It's going to be available to you in just a few weeks for crop growers clients. Mobile app where you can first see all your endorsements, but down the road you can actually buy an endorsement the same way that you would buy, when you go to a grocery store and just put your phone and you click three times and then you're done. Like your groceries are done. So we need to get to a point where endorsements can be purchased within 3 to 5 minutes as opposed to an hour, on the agent side. Then, there'll be like even more aggressive campaign to reach all the farms of all sizes, to properly cater to their needs. We'll be able to cater to their needs, and I think that we will see even more participation at that point. So part of the issue is technological, just technological barriers. But beyond that, I think that let's not put the primacy on tech excuses. I think that farmers in New York can do more even today and should do more even today.
Okay, great. Question for both of you. In the Northeast region, New York, Pennsylvania, perhaps, how would you split your DRP coverage between class 3 and 4? How much class 3 should a producer cover, do you think?
My take is that 45% class 3, 55 class 4. In fact, I have a slide here that I'll share quickly. Do I have a way to share, Chris?
I think we have to give you permission, which Kyle will do.
Kyle, could you please? Okay, show my screen. And let me just make sure that I'm showing the correct screen. Yeah, so what I have here is what I'm calling non-fat solids weight factor. So what I have here are the skim pounds in class 2, class 4, and half of the pounds in class 1 as a share of all skim pounds in the Federal Order 1. And you can see that that's between 0.5 and 0.6 very, very steadily over years, very steadily over years. You know, so that's why I say about 55% of your milk price is influenced by class 4, about 45 by class 3. You will always have some noise. You will always have these, you know, advanced versus announced rallies, and you know, you won't be able to get to a perfect hedge. But if you only do class 3 and then class 4 drops, and because class 4 dropped, your PPD dropped, then you don't have a protection against negative PPD. But if you do 55 class 4, 45 class 3, then when the class 4 drops and PPD drops, you'll get indemnities on class 4 to compensate for that negative PPD. Maybe not fully, but some of it will be compensated for. So that's the split that I would recommend.
Okay. Another DRP question is there a way for a producer to lock in the $5 per pound protein component price?
Yes, you know, you can. Well, I'm not sure anymore, but yeah, there's a way to lock in a price that's based on components rather than the class 3. So you can declare, for example, if you have jerseys and you have like 5040, you can go in and you can say, give me 50 butterfat, 40 protein, and then your price, which will be compared, you know, with the actual price for indemnity purposes, will depend on what's the price of butterfat, price of protein, and price of other solids for dry whey. So you can create your own composite price. And the benefit of those composite prices is that when class 3 goes down, those composite prices were very high protein, declared protein, they go down faster. So you get bigger indemnity. Which is what you would expect on your milk check, right? If you have high solids herd, you know, and you know, if cheese goes down, your check is going to go down faster than the class 3 price.
Okay.
Sorry,
go ahead.
I would be tempted in that case if we're specifically targeting protein, and again, this would take a farm that has significant expertise in risk management with some good advisors around them, but you could do a cheese futures contract that might preserve some of that protein price for longer on a rally like we had. You know, so something like that. So going outside of DRP, within DRP, I see what Marin's point is. I'm not a fan of the component contracts. Maybe we can find a way to learn them better. The reason being is that we sometimes get counter moving sort of ingredients within the same contract that are offsetting each other and not letting it pay out. So as the protein comes down, the butterfat might come up, for instance. So instead of a pure contract just protecting protein, which would be easy to understand and figure out what our strategy is, when you got two moving parts, I get concerned that we aren't getting what we think we're pining for.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and what I can add to that is that I still have a few years of non-compete on DRP. When we were designing DRP a few years ago, you know, we all committed to not design other dairy-related insurance products. But this summer, I purchased livestock risk protection. So I'm now, you know, an owner of that program, and I'll be innovating in the livestock and swine space. I do have some ideas what I want to do next with dairy once my non-compete expires, I think 2 or 3 years from now. So I think, Greg, you're right. We could have a LRP for dairy protein. We could have an LRP for dairy butterfat. We could have an LRP on PPD. You know, like so all of these, you know, like, you know, more richer space of crop insurance products that target specific needs in dairy producers.
Okay, one more for both of you, perhaps. It's often discussed how important it is to know net cost of production, break even, and basis. But it's also often recommended to layer in your DRP coverage by purchasing small contracts and periodically, perhaps every couple of weeks. Do those pieces of advice conflict at all, in your opinion? Aren't you systematically kind of putting coverage on and not focusing on your break even?
Greg, you
Yeah, I
want to
think there is a potential for conflict there. If I understand the question correctly, there could be times I have clients whose let's say a net cost of production of $19, maybe a break even of $19.50, and so our temptation is to set a trigger that would at least have a guarantee of profit, and yet you could wait till the end of time for a floor high enough to deliver that. So the first order of business is let's drive our net cost of production down. But if in the meantime, we want some protection. So usually I express that as how much loss do you want to endure on yourself, and how much loss do you want the DRP coverage to pick up? So we'll oftentimes just reset that number a bit lower so that we can trigger at least when we get a decent floor. Does that sort of answer the question?
I think so, Greg.
Chris, if I can just add like 5 cents on that. One of the purposes of layering is to overcome the being gun shy about this. Like, so if you're always so afraid that you'll miss a rally, that you're so afraid that like maybe this is not the right time, if you in your head you think of this as a binary decision, either now or later. It's not either now or later. You can do a little bit now, a little bit later. So by reducing the amount of pounds that you put on one endorsement, maybe you can overcome that idea that it's such a momentous decision that you could make a tremendous error that you will never recover from, right? So make smaller steps, like, get comfortable, like nothing is going to explode, like it's a tame program. So.
Yeah,
okay,
if I can
address that quick.
If I address that layering, I agree with that 100%. And I love skeet shooting and sporting clays. And what you've got to do is you've got to get ahead of the target. You've got to take an action and get ahead, right? And so you've got to take action as the market rises, but you never know if it's peaked yet. So the only way you're going to have the discipline and the guts to do that is to take, smaller positions as you either hit your trigger or get close to your trigger. You're going to take smaller positions and layer in, and you don't want to shoot all your bullets, right? Here's a metaphor for you. At just one bird. You're gonna keep some of your ammunition back and keep trying to layer in until the market signals that no, you're past the peak, or it's just no longer attractive. So I think it takes some of the emotion out of it, and it provides for discipline, and that's why it generally works.
Okay. So we're coming up on the top of the hour. I apologize for going over a little bit, but I think we had some great back and forth in the Q&A there. I do want to mention the special offer that we have for January and February, a free trial of the dairy market update with Marin Bozic if you just can't get enough of that stuff. It is really great information that's presented every other Wednesday. Go to cropgrowers.com and you'll see information on that offer if you take a look there. And is there anything else to follow up on, our last minute thoughts, Greg or Marin?
Well, thank you, Chris, for emceeing this webinar. Thank you all for your time today. I've recently learned a new abbreviation, TLDR. I was like, what's this? And it stands for too long, didn't read. So what's the TLDR for this webinar? Act now. That's the summary. Like, the best way to learn something is to start doing it. Like, that's where you get your sea legs. If you just study something on the sidelines, you'll always be a beginner. So act now. We have a wonderful collaboration here. Farm Credit East has the best tool in the market, and we always make it better based on your feedback. So now we'll have a mobile app coming out. We'll have soon, other bells and whistles to it. Like, your agents are excellent, your consultants are excellent. It's a great team. It's a great family to be a part of. And I hope that you reach out to your contacts in Farm Credit and join us in this. And we'll work our very hardest to make you successful in 2021 and later.
Yeah, I would echo that, Marin, that this stuff can be pretty easily overwhelming and can lead to analysis paralysis. So I'd encourage you, those of you out there listening, contact your crop grower's agent, and it's free to talk, and they can really help guide you through some of the choices and come up with what's best for your operation. So with that, I think we'll wrap up, and I'll thank Marin and Greg, and thank the attendees, and we're adjourned.